So I'll kick it off with the first one that you have to credit Doug for this.
Yep.
And to be honest, when we first started, this almost annoyed me about Doug because I didn't believe this. Because and remember as we go through this list, by the way, there's always exceptions to the rule. And so that's what you got to be careful of. Like, there's always like a podcast that you could draw to and be like, well, yeah, but this doesn't do that. Or they do this. Like, okay, a lot of some of these are general truths that we have found over the last 8 years of podcasting. And the first one was the sound. That sound is very, very important.
Very important.
And Doug was crazy when we first started. I mean, he would
put blankets up on the wall and over the furniture. And this is back when we started the podcast in his house. And then we moved to a small studio. But, a podcast, nowadays, I think people assume this, by the way. This was 8 years ago. There were a lot of podcasts with crappy sound, which is, I think, why we thought it was not a big deal.
I thought for sure we were going to be auto-tuned. Yeah, just to make sure the level of like he was going in terms of like details and all the background noise and any kind of like fuzz from our electronics or anything was like accounted for.
So since we credit you, Doug, on this, are there any tools that you use to make the sound, or any things that you would say are extremely important in order? Because I know the next thing that people are going to ask us is, okay, well then what are some of the things you did to have great quality sound?
Yeah, so the number one thing is the room treatment, the sound treatment inside the room. So if you have reflective surfaces, this is what causes your audio to sound like you're recording in a bathroom. And that's the last thing you really want. So when we started recording in my living room, it had hardwood floors. It was actually a horrible place to record. And so I did all these different things that you mentioned, like put up the blankets, that type of thing, to make it sound better. But if you go back to those early episodes, the sound was actually not that great.
No. And would you say that that is far more important than even the equipment and the microphones that you have?
So you can have the best microphones, the best equipment, and you have a crappy environment with reflective surfaces and that type of thing, you're going to have crappy sound. You can have kind of marginal equipment, but very good sound treatment on the walls, you're going to have okay sound. Right. Now, I'm not going to suggest you go out and buy some crappy equipment, but you can get microphones, recorders, and everything else for a very reasonable price.
Yeah, they're not expensive anymore. And like you look at our walls here, we have these foam kind of, they block sound, or they make sound so it doesn't reverberate. The floor, we have carpet. You could do this with blankets. You could do this with thick blankets as well. I know people who record podcasts, they'll take a closet and they'll change it into a recording studio, and then they'll put blankets everywhere, and then the sound is just as good as this one.
Right.
Unless you're making a visual, of course, then you have to have a studio like we do. But if it's just a podcast, that'll do a lot.
Yeah, but those little things, I mean, like eating on the podcast, like ruffling papers, like you got to think of what the audience is actually experiencing in this, and that's really obnoxious. When it really was confirmed for me was years later, after we had already been recording for some time, and the feedback from people you would hear, and I've heard this many times now, of people that said, I used to listen to other podcasts, and once I listened to the show, Mind Pump, the rest of them were ruined for me because of the sound quality. Mm-hmm. And so even if I liked the content, the sound quality was so clean and sharp coming from our show that it ruined the show for the other shows that they were listening to prior to that.
Well, you got to think a lot of podcasts are consumed with headphones or earbuds. So the sound is in your head, and you can hear every little off sound. And if it makes it's got to be palatable. It has to be very palatable, because you're going to have headphones on or earbuds. So the sound should be clean. It should not be offensive anyway, where it's like too much treble or too much mouth noise. It's got to sound warm, comfortable, and palatable. And that makes a huge difference, especially if you want an audience that's going to come back.